there's multiple pieces of work that was done. Bring them on camera. Oh, you want to come on camera, brother? Okay, let me see. I don't know how to do it. You guys might have to walk me to it. Let me see. If you want to be added, I guess that's what you did, was you hit a button there. Can't bring Langston on camera. I hit the little button at the bottom that said bring him on camera. It says can't. So I don't really know how to do that. But what you could do is perhaps we could talk after this is over, because I'm doing these sessions Wednesday through Sunday. 5 days a week, and then I rest on Monday and Tuesdays. Sometimes I still may paint on Monday and Tuesdays, but I don't record myself because I'm also putting this out to YouTube. So if you go to Stephen Foreman, that's my YouTube channel, and then subscribe to that. Eventually, at least 90 minutes of my painting sessions that I do. Of course, my painting sessions are 4 hours a day, so and I like to keep the camera rolling because it inspires me to keep painting. Because sometimes I paint and I only paint for like 2 hours, But since I've been doing these sessions, I paint all 4 hours. I don't cheat, But then sometimes I paint like 15 hours. I just can't stop. I can't sleep. Can't do anything. It really depends on, my energy, my mood, So essentially what I'm going to do is start building my palette first, because that's the first step I have to do. And at the same time while I'm doing that, I'm going to be teaching history in the background with these lives. So I'm getting better and better at actually painting. And okay, so basically, this person here is Powhatan Tsenacommacah's brother, Tsenacommacah. And actually, he was actually more the paramount chief, more so than Powhatan Tsenacommacah, because Powhatan Tsenacommacah died in 1618, and basically he took over at 1618 and ruled all the way to 1647, and that's when he was killed, basically in battle. Okay, so and he was 99 years old, almost 100 years old. So I don't know how much of a kill in battle. Actually, to tell you the truth, it was deception, and I could talk about that. But basically, what I'm going to do is just build my palette and start getting ready. But basically, what happened was Powhatan inherited 7 nations, and he built those up to 31 nations by the time he died. There are paintings available about this series that actually people made way after the fact. And during the abduction, there's actually engravings and also pictures that was made by some, not necessarily contemporaries, but people who came about 50 to 100 years later of some of these events. So a lot of my paintings are based on research that I've done on the events that happened between 1607 and basically all the way up to now, because there's so many things that's happened even in the 19th century. Well, I say that and even up into the 19th century, that affects the descendants of the Tsenacommacah. That affects people who have heritage that comes from the original Tsenacommacah natives, indigenous natives. So it takes time to actually make a painting. So, I try to teach a little bit every day. I do some overlap in some of the historical teaching that I do, because not everybody tunes in every day. So I do some overlap so the people who have missed, say, some previous days that I've done can kind of get some kind of foundation in terms of the new things that I'll be talking about, as I go through the teaching. But his common name is Chief Powhatan, but his real name and title was Mama Mana Mama-Natowick. That was the name for the premier king of kings. And then, of course, if you was the king of, say, like the Pamunkey or the Mattapanai, you would call it Wessawarrants. So he was the Wessawarrants of the Powhatans, but he was the Mama-Manowick of the entire Tsenacommacah nation that included the Powhatans and many others. And I think that it's considered, to me, it's kind of an insult to consider him as a chief, when this man was known all the way from tribes that's always almost on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. He was known even in the New York area, New Jersey area, as well as all the way down to the Georgia and Alabama area by other natives before the indigenous people came. So he was a very renowned individual in his own right before the English came. So he wasn't a chief, he was definitely a king. And from the actual descriptions, even of John Smith, because we get a lot of our information from John Smith, unfortunately. He's the enemy. He's the person who basically was the mortal enemy of the Tsenacommacahs. But in addition to that, he positioned himself like he was a friend all at the same time. And on the one hand, he's trying to genocide them. On the other hand, he's trying to befriend them. So it was a very weird relationship that was going on there, and it really was a deception, because in the end, the English had already known about the exploits of Cortez in Mexico, and many of the Portuguese and the Spanish of other countries had already exploited the natives of those countries. And so the English already had a playbook to go by. They already had, they already knew exactly what they were going to do before they even got here. Before they even left England, they made a plan. Before they even got the money together, before the London company started to speculate on how England could score some more land for itself. Irregardless of the people who was already living on the land. It didn't seem to matter that there was people already living here. And there was at least 100,000 natives living here, when about 100 to 200, somewhere around 200 Englishmen. Now, when the Englishmen first got here in 1707, it wasn't just Englishmen. They actually had African slaves with them to do the labor work, as well as poor peasants from England. And these people were basically designated to do labor. And they brought artisans and skilled people with them as well. People who could work in wood and build, and people, brought blacksmith to work in metal. So they brought everything they needed to actually start a small colony, a small civilization. However, what they needed most above anything was labor. So it's been proven by various archaeologists that by looking at the bones and basically testing the DNA, that there were actually African people in Jamestown. So also the Moors of Spain, before they were kicked out of Spain, so to speak, they were already traveling to the West Indies, because a lot of people don't understand that Pedro Alonso Nino led Christopher Columbus ships to discover Jamaica. So they were already, and the Moors thought, when we're talking about India, they thought, well, there's a voyage that we could take. They were already trading with some people that fit the description. So Pedro Alonso Nino, you can Google him. Already the septum was used by African people of Northwest Africa, as well as various people all the way to East Africa. So the septum might not just have been a European invention. It probably was an adaptation from exchange with people that was going to India and China and places like that, before people like Magellan and people like that start exploring. So they were using the stars to navigate over the desert, because it's a vast desert, so they can get across Africa and then go past Saudi Arabia desert in order to get to places like India, and then eventually trade with people like China, stuff like that. So That was before they started sailing around Africa and stopping off at different locations and exploiting the Africans as well. Okay, so all this was happening. This is the climate where Europeans had the guns, the cannons. They had developed a very sophisticated, aggressive war program. And they met civilizations that were inferior to them in terms of military. And they exploited that advantage and became very wealthy. Europe basically went from the Dark Ages, the medieval Dark Ages, right to the Renaissance. That happened right around the time slavery got implemented and the genocide of various indigenous peoples all over the world, and their riches was taken from the original places they were, places like Africa, India, and also the Aztec, the Mayan, and the Incas to Europe. So it was an opportunity for someone with superior military to get really, really wealthy by taking advantage of much less developed countries. So that is the climate in which the London Company and John Smith and John Rolfe lived in. That was the realities of what they wanted to do. And there was no reason why they couldn't get rich just like Cortez got filthy rich, and all the people who invested with Cortez and all the other Spanish and Portuguese and other European countries that were already exploiting. And if the English didn't get here to Jamestown and exploit, surely the Dutch would have done that, or the French, or Spain, or Portugal, or any one of the other European powers, because we know that just a little while later in New York was a Dutch colony before it was an English colony, and English basically sieged New York. That's why you call that area Harlem, because they named that after Harlem, you know. And so you have Harlem in New York because that first settlement was a Dutch settlement. Of course, then the Duke of York financed an expedition to kind of take over that area. And the English were able to capture New York for England and turn it from a Dutch colony to a English colony. Of course, a lot of people like the Roosevelts, they were Dutch. They changed their name from a Germanic name like Roosevelt. It was much more German before, but then they kind of Englishified it. See, these are the first families of various colonies. The first families of Jamestown was the Rolfe family, one of the first families, one of the first prominent families with some means, not poor people, but some means, was the Rolfe family. And John Rolfe was ruthless. And there have been some films portraying Tsenacommacah. They abbreviated his name because, you know, that's a whole lot to say for most, especially American people, Tsenacommacah. So, but he has been portrayed in films before. And he basically is a hero for his people. More so than Tsenacommacah. How come we don't hear about Tsenacommacah so much? We always hear about Chief Powhatan. The reason why Chief Powhatan or Tsenacommacah was a negotiator. He was already an older gentleman by the time the English got there. So he had negotiated the he had already negotiated the building of his kingdom by simply talking to other tribal leaders and convincing them to come underneath his auspices, to come underneath his kingdom. And in some cases where they didn't, he was a tough enough of a guy. He was a tough enough of a guy to basically, okay, well, if you don't want to join me, I'm going to have to kill you and take over. So he was ruthless also. So Tsenacommacah was a tough guy. He was tough, but he also was a diplomat as well. And he used quite a bit of his diplomatic skills with the English. Because you have to remember, they were basically, their tools, their weapons were made out of stone. Their weapons were made out of wood and stone and things like that. And the English had steel. So that was a huge advantage. And the only thing the natives had really was their guerrilla warfare style of combat, which they used, and the speed of using the canoe, getting from place to place very, very quickly. Because the canoe, what the canoe was, the English, of course, were maritime people also, but their ships were huge. Even the boats they had to row moved fairly slowly, because they went deep down in the water. You know, they were made to hold heavy loads. The canoes was made to hold a certain amount of weight, basically the weight of a few warriors with their war gear. But they could actually navigate on a few inches of water. That's all they needed. The canoes didn't need, 3, 4, 5 feet of water to be able to navigate. All they needed was a few inches, and they could just go down a creek, not even a stream, a small creek could be navigated, a swamp could be navigated. And then that same canoe was able to go out onto the Chesapeake Bay and even go from from the Norfolk side of the Chesapeake Bay to the New Jersey side. So that would cover a lot of distance. I mean, he could always be, hello, Angela Jones, how you doing? Good to see you. I'm basically painting and doing the history of my painting at the same time. Kathy Smith, how you doing? Kimberly Foreman, yes, the Mattapanai. But you know what? What I found out is that we're not just Mattapanai. We're probably also Pamunkey, as well as a lot of other stuff. Because the original tribe was called the Tsenacommacah, and all these individual tribes or nations is like what I like to call it, intermarried with each other after Powhatan Confederacy. There were 7 nations that, including the Mattapanai and the Pamunkey, and a different tribe. Actually, people always think it's the Powhatan tribe, but actually the Powhatan tribe is Churchill, Virginia. That's where they were located at. So if you go to the area of Churchill, that's where the original Powhats live. That's where the original Powhatans live. That's it. Waving back. That's where the Powhatans, and they won't call Powhatan. They will call Powhatan. So if you get into the language, because some linguists have used other Allegorian tribes who still have their language intact, using the notes of the colonials and some information from various families in Virginia that still has words together. This linguist that it was a movie that was made, and the director wanted people to speak in the native language. And what happened was this movie financed this linguist to be able to basically rebuild the Tsenacommacah language based on other similar languages. It's kind of like if you was to rebuild Spanish based on Italian and Romanian and French. I mean, it's possible. Or if you was to rebuild the Latin language, for example, the language that the Romans spoke, based on the fragmental languages that came out of those, the child languages that came out of that parent language. So you have a parent language, and then you have other child languages like Spanish, Italian, Romanian, French. And then what you do is go by known definitions and pronunciations based on phonics from other civilizations that still exist, so you know how that sound. And you can basically try to put together your best guess as to what the language is like. So that's what at least that is something. I mean, it's better than having nothing, but there are classes you can go to out Route 30 and join up for. That's on Dawn Road, and join up for. And actually, I believe in some other places too, going even all the way up to Fredericksburg, and actually learn the language. And what a lot of the actual natives do, who are very proud of their ancient language, they're starting to try to teach that in their private schools, the private Native American schools. They're trying to teach their language, kind of like what the Jews did to rebuild Hebrew. You know, Hebrew did not exist for hundreds of years. The Jews spoke Yiddish for the most part. And then some fragmentary words that basically almost seem like Canaanite words. But anyway, to make a long story short, they got some linguists together, and they got Syriac and Aramaic and got the ancient Canaanite language together, as well as the ancient Egyptian language, and they rebuilt their language. Of course, today they have a full-fledged language now, and something like this is being attempted for the Tsenacommacahs right now. There's an attempt for people to want to completely rebuild the language and try to get that as a spoken word language again. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, and again, his hometowns was near the falls of the James River. That's where you start getting the rocks and the white water. So all that area is Powhatan. Now, when you get to Powhatan, a slightly different area, that is the Holy Land. Powwow means place of gathering. Powhatan means place. So Pow means place. Wow means gathering. Height means divine. So divine place was Powhatan. That's the Bon Air area of Richmond. The area that you see if you sit out on Cimarron and look over the James River toward the west, southwest, that would be Powhatan. And again, I always tell people the name of the James River was called the Powhatan River. That's what the natives called it. Of course, the colonists thought, oh, they're naming this after their king, Powhatan. So we have to name the James River, rename it, because now we're in charge. So what the colonials did was they named it after their king, which is King James. But Powhatan was never the name of King Powhatan. His name was King Powhatan. His name was never Powhatan. His tribe was Powhatan. And with the natives, they didn't have first and last names like we have. So if the natives, if you wanted to say, take me to your leader, what they did was say, take me to your leader, the king. Who's the boss? And they said that boss would be, Mama Natowik. And then they would say, Wessel Lawrence, Powhatan, Wahansanoka. So that's a lot to say for an Englishman. But the word they took away for that was that you had to go to Richmond, which is Powhatan. That's where you had to go. You had to go to Powhatan. And it sounds like town. Powhatan sounds like town. So they said, oh, Powhatan. Okay. So the English could say that. And of course, what John Smith wanted to do was find Powhatan and actually kill him. He didn't want to discuss anything with him. But when he met him, they found out he was quite a formidable leader. He was hard to kill. As a matter of fact, instead of Captain John Smith capturing Powhatan, Tsenacommacah, Powhatan's half-brother or maybe full brother, caught John Smith and killed his men. And John Smith tied a native boy to his body to avoid the arrows. And he still got arrows in him, but at least his vital parts got spared. And then what happened was Tsenacommacah took the best example of the new people that came back to very prominent Western Warrenses in the Romantic-Realistic-Figurative area. Now that would be Gloucester County. And they were very startled at this, the flesh made out of metal, basically his breastplate and his helmet and stuff like that. And that's what caused Captain John Smith not to die from all of the arrows when the natives actually ambushed him. He just had all that, English armor on. So the bottom line is, what he had was a lot of things that the natives hadn't seen before. That's metallic things. So Captain John Smith used those things to keep himself alive. The natives were so startled and so amazed at these things. And what the natives, and when he was taken to see Wahansanoka, and by John Smith's own words, when he went to see Wahansanoka, he saw a person draped in pearls. So the Chesapeake Bay was full of pearls and beads that they had made out of, I don't know what you call it, but it's the beads that are made out of clamshells. They're really nice pearl-like beads. And these were the beads of the royalty. And the way he carried himself, Captain John Smith, was just like any English royalty that he had ever seen. But if it wasn't for the fact that Powhatan Confederacy was basically naked. Of course, what Captain John Smith called him, it says, he's never seen such grace and poise, and a savage. That was his words, exact words. So even though he was very surprised at what he saw when Tsenacommacah took him to see King Powhatan, he didn't go on his own will. We went because Powhatan Confederacy wanted to see him. He requested to see what the new colonists looked like. And so Powhatan Confederacy took him. And so what Captain John Smith did to keep himself alive is that he kept showing the natives all these little shiny things he had made out of metal. You know, his weapons, his breastplate, mirrors, things like that. Things that would cause the native to be really amazed. And he basically started to kind of, I guess he was trying to, I'm not going to say bribe, but he was basically trying to, you know, kind of to just gain the admiration of Powhatan Confederacy, you know, kind of kissing up to him, I guess you would say, to keep himself alive. And it worked, because what happened was Captain John Smith made friends with Powhatan Confederacy to some level, because he gave such great gifts. And Powhatan Confederacy liked these gifts. And he said, well, maybe there's been a misunderstanding. I guess that's what they thought. I mean, we don't know. And basically, Captain John Smith was delivered back to the Jamestown colony unhurt from that point on. And that proved to be a mistake, but of course, they had no crystal ball. They couldn't see the future. They really didn't know what Captain John Smith was up to. All they know is that this guy had entered their land. Of course, what people think is when the British got off the ship, everything was great, because that's what they tell you in elementary school. But in reality, is when the British got off the ship, they opened fire on the natives almost immediately. And a battle kind of ensued almost immediately. That's actually what really happened. That's according to Captain John Smith's own journal. Because what a lot of people don't understand, the Moors, the Spanish Moors, these were African people from West Africa who, just like you have African Americans living in USA, they were living for hundreds of years already in Spain. And they were sailors. That's how they got to Spain in the first place. They were people who traveled by maritime, by ship. And they used the septet to travel by. And they were already trading with the natives. So there's a person named Don, D-O-N, that's a title, Luis, that's a Spanish name, L-I-U-S, who had already in the 1500s befriended the Tsenacommacah and was here, and they were doing friendly trading. And he had married into Powhatan Confederacy's family. And so it's rumored, because they really did, English didn't know anything about what happened before they came. So they didn't really know, they just knew that Tsenacommacah seemed to know a whole lot about their weapons and how to avoid being killed. And also, he picked up some of the language, I'm not going to say fairly quickly, but he seemed to pick up languages very fast. And of course, the English spoke basically English. And of course, the story about Don Luis is that he had lived in Spain, but he had also lived in Mexico. So he was part of the people who was in Mexico. And whatever happened, perhaps slavery was starting to get going in Mexico. I don't know what was happening. But it wasn't a good thing that was going down there. And he wound up leaving Mexico and wound up in Virginia. And this was maybe 100 years, or not 100 years, 50 years or so before Captain John Smith arrived. And that's basically according to archaeologists. Now, people like Captain John Smith and the colonists speculated about Powhatan Confederacy because he was somewhat of a mystery. Now, not Powhatan Confederacy, Tsenacommacah. Now, Powhatan Confederacy was more predictable. because he performed more like a native person. He performed, his knowledge base seemed like the knowledge base of a native person. But Tsenacommacah's knowledge base, to them, seemed to be a little bit extraordinary. It's like, how did he know that? I mean, things like that. And his particular soldiers that work under him. Now, Tsenacommacah came from the Pamunkey tribe. His mother was from the Pamunkey tribe, but his father was from the Mattaponi tribe. So that's his origin. Tsenacommacah's family was from the Powhatan tribe. But again, these tribes intermarried with each other quite a bit and lived with each other. I mean, nobody lived in one particular spot like we do today. This is my house at this location. They went to stay with each other in their various villages from time to time. So even though the primary tribe or location, what do we call these tribes? Let's call these cities. These are basically cities along the river. The primary location was where the Pamunkeys, with Tsenacommacah. However, he had many places he lived. And when the English came, Tsenacommacah was not living in the Richmond area at Powhatan. He was living down in Tsenacommacah, which is present-day Gloucester, basically where Jamestown is, but on the north side. And that was basically where the leaders lived. That was where the royals of the natives lived, at a place called Tsenacommacah. Now, Tsenacommacah got abolished or abandoned, and the reason why is because it was a place of power for the Warrenses and for the Matoaks, the future man, and they didn't want any more Tsenacommacahs to come up. So it was very important for them to reappropriate that land for the colonial people, reappropriate that area. In other words, destroy the Pamunkey base for their royalty, which was Tsenacommacah, and the Mattaponi base, destroy that, as those two tribes are very much lined up with each other, so to speak. Along those two river bases, they're kind of in close proximity to each other. But in addition to that, that's where all of a lot of the future kings and queens tend to rise up from those tribes. Now, again, Tsenacommacah is a little bit different because his family is basically from the Powhatan. So, but he was a tall man. He was about, by Captain John Smith's record, he was very tall. And he had a very, very fit body. Even for a man that was a little bit more of age, he had and again, Tsenacommacah was very tall, very, very tall, and had a very powerful body. So these guys were some serious, intimidating characters. These weren't just some skinny guy sitting there around, smoking a peace pipe. These were some guys who was about action. They were about getting some stuff done. In terms of, if you didn't behave right, they was gonna come in with the tomahawk and bust a head open or two. That's basically what I get from the description of the English. I was afraid they were these guys, because for the most part, when these guys were on the prowl, when these guys had the upper hand, and that was basically from the very first moment, from 1607 all the way through 1618. Well, actually 1613, when they abducted Matoaka, the natives had the upper hand. And what gave the colonials the advantage is they abducted Matoaka. And then, of course, Matoaka was somebody, her name meant basically she was the womb. The natives, the kings went through the maternal branch of the family. In other words, the king, Tsenacommacah, had to marry a woman of the nobility in order for him to become king. It was impossible for him to become king. So what happened was, in reality, with the bloodline, the only way you could guarantee that the bloodline was preserved was you had to see the baby come out of the womb. You knew that that was the bloodline that went back tens of thousands of years to the original great-great-great-grandfathers of the Tsenacommacahs or the Powhats or whoever. So you had to see it come out the womb, because a lot of times women might have been with different men. And it might not be the child of the king and the queen. It might be the child of that guy over there and the queen. So it was very important not to have the bloodline go through the man where you couldn't prove that, but have the actual bloodline go through the woman. So that meant that Matoaka's aunts, Matoaka's mother, these people were very important, because in order for a man to become a king, he had to marry that particular bloodline. And what they had a tendency to do was, what they did was the first oldest daughter, generally the oldest a little bit, got a head start on the other kids, and they're just a little bit more advanced, would usually be the one selected to be the Matoaka, to be the person who had the womb that was designated to be the next king and the queen. Not all the brothers and sisters got to do that. And now what happened was, if the oldest sister died, or say the sister that the parents thought would be the better womb because maybe she was more healthy or whatever, then the next oldest sister, and it would kind of go down the line like that. And then of course, if the oldest sister and all of the children of the queen died, then that would go to the queen's sister. So then you could have cousins who could be, you know, so that's how you kept the bloodline. It was through the women. It was not through the men. So what happened is you got a very tough, strong leader that was selected by the parents of Pocahontas, or the parents of the person who was the person who was elected to be the womb of the next leaders of their tribe. Let's call them leaders. You can call them reservoirs. You can call them Mama-Natoics. But whatever title you want to use. But actually, Mama-Natoic is the king of kings. It's basically the emperor, the boss of everybody. So I'm going to use the word Mama-Natoic. I think it's more appropriate. But if you were going to be that person, you know, you had to be selected by your parents to be that person. And then in addition to that, you had to, you know, you had to kind of earn it a little bit. And of course, they would select the best man. Now, your job was not to be in love with the guy. Your job was just to make the next heir. And what happened was, the women who were the Matoakas, the women who were the bloodline, they could have multiple husbands, because just because your husband was the king, that doesn't mean that he was your only husband. And also that don't mean that you were his only wife. For example, Tsenacommacah had many wives. So it was possible, after she had her daughter, not her son, but after she had enough daughters, a premier daughter, it was possible for her to go find someone else. And she could have as many she could have as many husbands as she wanted. Likewise, so could the Wezawarxes, and so could the Mama-Natoics. But the average common people, they really couldn't do that. But others could. Others could. So that's kind of like part of the culture of the Tsenacommacahs. And so that's why Matoaka was so important. She was important because of her womb, of who she was. And what it was that Tsenacommacah knew that that was the only way he can guarantee that his bloodline could stay on the throne, because she was his daughter. So his bloodline was not part of the original bloodline. He got in there by marrying his wife. So by him adding his warrior powers, or his wisdom powers, or his kingship to the divine bloodline of kings and queens, it guaranteed that his bloodline would live on as kings forever through Matoaka. So it was very important. Now, did she have half sisters that also was sisters of Powhatan? Yes. But for whatever reason, those sisters might have been the sisters of Matoaka's mother. And Matoaka's mother had a stronger claim for the bloodline. She was the one selected by her parents. So she was the daughter of the most prominent wife, or the wife that had the strongest claim to the bloodline. She was that daughter. So that's why she was so important. So what she was she was a bit on the curious side, and I don't think at that time she herself, the children, the little colonial, they weren't children, but I guess they were teenage boys. They weren't girls. And what happened is they had some trading posts set up with the English. The English found out that the natives, well, actually the English didn't plan their food right, and they started to starve. They started to miss out on food. So, and bring them on camera. Okay, I don't know if this thing is saying bring on camera or you guys actually want to go on camera, but I'm gonna bring you guys on camera if you want. I'm gonna just hit add if you want to come in. If you don't, I think it's so many. I think it's just Facebook doing it. Somebody's waving, so I'm waving back. How you guys doing? So the original natives were not called Powhatans. That was one small tribe of 31 tribes. Not a small tribe, but there was Powhatan tribe, which was one tribe of 31 tribes. The natives that covered all of Virginia were called Tsenacommacah. All of this you can find, sometimes you can even find it as easily as doing a Google search. But also you can go to places like the College of William and Mary, various local schools, the Native American Studies, and you can verify what I'm saying. So I am actually speaking real history, just making it up. And I always do some research before I do my paintings because I just like history, and I tend to paint things that I'm excited about. And of course, since my grandfather was Mattaponi Native American, my grandfather, I feel very connected with this painting in a way. I feel very connected about the research that I'm doing. I feel very a certain way, actually, when I'm learning some of the stories. However, I feel compelled to want to tell the truth about it because oftentimes, like I say, in American schools, the story is kind of skirted around because it's embarrassing. I mean, how can we go and fight the Nazis in World War II and say they had all these atrocities when here we are as Americans with worse atrocities that lasted a lot longer? So I can see how Americans would start to say, okay, let's go ahead and scoot past this part of our history, and let's go right on to Yankee Doodle part of it, and we're beating drums and blowing flutes and fighting the redcoats, who were basically their own people. But because what happened was the colonizers wanted to make money. The original people that came here were tired of being poor in Europe. They were tired of being on the bottom. And most people was coming here because they didn't see much of a future for themselves in Europe. And so there was a lot of promise in coming here because they had heard about the things that went on in Spain and Portugal and the riches that people had made. And they would say, hey, this sounds like a good opportunity. Now, they didn't care that there was people over here already that might had a culture going already and might have felt like they want to kind of keep that going too. They wanted to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness also. And, that goes to how human nature is, I guess. It's human nature. But I think when you start to erase the history of a certain group of people, it's up to me. I feel like it's up to me to be a spokesperson for them, because who else is going to do it? If I don't do it, who else is going to do it? Nobody. So I feel like it's something that I need to do. And of course, this is an oil painting, and by making this a series of this, I can actually make images. That's a lot easier to understand than actually words. But I can make images that can actually tell the story, can tell the story, can compel people to want to talk about the story. And since it's an image that exists, it would alleviate some of the pain a little bit, because I, in making the image, can resolve a few of the harder issues. And this painting right here is about the harder issues. This painting is about the harder issues, and it is not about. It's not about the softer issues. You know, it's about the. Did John Rolfe actually, according to the Matoaka tribe, according to King Costello, who is now deceased, but he was a graduate of University of Richmond, PhD, Dr. King Costello, who researched his own lineage and his own Matoaka natives and provided a lot of this information from his family archives, his family, basically being that he was a king. It was the, they call it the sacred Matoaka history. And of course, since it was kind of like secretly the sacred Matoaka history, and it told a story that most people from this area, since they're the guilty people, didn't want to hear. So it wasn't until like the middle 1970s or 60s before people start paying attention to Costello's, or maybe it was even 1980s before people started paying attention to Costello's work in terms of communications about the Matoaka and the Native Americans and the history from the Native American point of view. Because all of our history before then came by way of John Rolfe, who was an enslaver, who was a genocider, and an exploiter of many people, including his own English people, by the way. And and also he was a spin doctor. And that's why we have the story of the so-called person, the fictitious person of Pocahontas, because Poca means little in Latin, and yes, John Rolfe was educated somewhat, and he took Latin, so he knew what the Latin word for polka means, or polka, little girl. And of course, hantis in Greek means wanton woman, or bitch, or whore. So that's not a good word, John Rolfe, the Christian, the man that wanted to be pious and this and that, and make sure that she was married under God as a Christian, to call somebody little whore when he was 54 years old, when he married somebody who was basically 11 or 12, so to speak, and had children with her. Maybe she was 13. That's a huge age difference. Now, I know in the older days, people got married earlier, but it probably was a person closer to her age that they married a little bit earlier. And maybe that age was still about 15, 16, maybe 17, 18. But just to say even 15, but it was somebody closer to her age. So somebody that would be out of her group more so. It wouldn't necessarily be somebody who is, and 50-something-year-old was very old for that age, It's a long-lived individual for that time. And he'd already had a wife, an English wife, who had mysteriously died in Bermuda on the way to the colony, on the way to Jamestown. They hadn't even gotten to Jamestown yet. And so it's just amazing that that this would happen. He would be the one, not a younger person from the colony that would be more suiting for somebody like her, that she will actually probably want to choose that individual. Not a person who is from her own tribe. Now here's a person from her own tribe. His name was Cocoon. Cocoon was Matoaka's first husband, native husband. He was a native man. He was not an Englishman. But what John Rolfe found out was that if you married Matoaka, you get to be the king. Because that's how they found out about the natives, some of the friendlier natives. I'm not going to say friendlier, some of the children. Because they had a linguist who had basically learned a similar language to theirs from tribes that basically was already affiliated with the Spanish from long ago. So they had European linguists already with the colony. And so they were there to do a lot of translating. And what happened was the children would come up out of curiosity. They would have little fancy things, and they would kind of bribe the kids to come over, and the native kids to come over and look. And of course, what happened was they would begin to try to communicate, because the children were kind of harmless. They weren't warriors. They were just little kids. And they were curious. So that was a really good way to get intelligence, to get intel. And you got to remember, Captain John Smith was a military man. He was not a diplomat. He wasn't a businessman. He was basically a head crusher. His job was to seek and destroy. That's basically what his profession was. John Rolfe was the businessman. His job was to make money by any means necessary. So you had some pretty motivated people already that you're dealing with in John Rolfe. And they both was really anxious about doing what they came there to do. And that basically was to subdue the land and make as much money as possible in doing so, to exploit. But what they found was it was a hard way to go. It wasn't as easy as they thought. They found tough adversary in Tsenacommacah from the very beginning, from 1707. Tsenacommacah never, ever trusted the English, because he probably was the tribe that got fired upon as soon as the English got off the ship. It was probably some of his friends that died, because the English just simply went right into them. I mean, they just opened the muskets up on them, and it was just not a good scene from that point on. And they didn't realize that they had a pretty tough king there, pretty tough reservoirs in Tsenacommacah. However, Tsenacommacah was not the Matoaka. He was not the supreme king. He was the reservoirs. He was simply the king of the Pamunkey. He was the king of the Pamunkey. He was not the king of the entire Confederation. Powhatan Confederacy was. Even though he was related to Powhatan Confederacy, probably brother, half-brother, something like that, the colonizers didn't know exactly what that was, because the natives kept their wives, or kept the important women, secret. They really didn't want. These women were very more important than the men. So the men would risk themselves with the colonials and expose their identity and talk and meet and this kind of thing. But the women, basically, that won't gonna happen. They didn't want to risk that, because the royal women. Now, if you was just a common Native American woman, you could be risked. But the royal Native American women, that wasn't gonna happen. You wasn't gonna go in and mess with the bloodline any old kind of way. They preserved that at all costs. So now we're at this situation where Matoaka is one of the women of the bloodline. She is the person of the bloodline. And she had already had a girl. Now, what Matoaka had with John Smith in about 1614 was a boy. I believe it was John or Thomas Rolfe. She had a boy. So it's no way. John Rolfe assumed from the English point of view that Matoaka, the son, would basically inherit all of the Virginians, and the natives would embrace that. But he was actually wrong. The reality is he should have had a daughter with Matoaka. Then perhaps that might have been a chance that the natives might embrace that. But it was no way that the native would embrace a son. But it was a way, it was the English tradition that if you had a son, he could become the king, and he could select whatever wife he wanted. But so they had a little bit of a time kind of wrapping their head around the way the kingship passed down from person to person, from generation to generation, through the bloodline of the Tsenacommacah. They had a little bit of a time trying to figure that out. And but what they were trying to do is figure it out to position themselves, because in England, John Rolfe was from a mercantile family. He wasn't necessarily from the aristocracy. But he had, but like in England, a lot of people wanted to get into that family. They wanted to get in the family of the king. Because that would ensure that their people from that point on would be living the good life. Because if you was from the aristocracy, you're basically like a made man in the mafia. You were untouchable. So everybody wanted that status in Europe. Very few people got that status, but everybody wanted it. So in comes Powhatan Confederacy as a king. And not only is he a king, but he's a very powerful king. But it was a king that both Captain John Smith and John Rolfe thought that they could trick, fool, manipulate. They probably couldn't do this to the English king so well. They've seen it all. They've seen all the tricks over there in Europe. But the natives, they weren't used to all the tricky stuff. They were more or less, what you said is what you meant. And that's how it went down, So these guys thought that, okay, this is a whole new thing. I think once they got over this, they're so far removed from England, we almost can do whatever we want. We don't even have to worry about church too much. We can rape people. We can do whatever we want over here. We can let people live, or we can take their life. We're basically the kings here. So I imagine John Rolfe and Captain John Smith was feeling a little bit of a swag. It's feeling a little bit empowered. He was feeling what it was like to be a king. And they were admiring the fact that here he is, this king, but he's a savage in their opinion. His name was Powhatan Confederacy. But there's a chance that they can trick these savage people, because they really felt like they had a upper hand on the native people. From the very beginning, they could easily kill them if they caught them out in the open. The only way that the main way that Powhatan Confederacy battled them is through guerrilla warfare, through stealth. He just appeared from nowhere, did his damage, and disappeared. That was the only way they could really deal with the muskets and the cannons and the steel swords and the lances and so forth that the English had. So, but that guerrilla warfare and that tomahawk proved to be a very, very formidable battle plan. And it got Powhatan Confederacy a whole lot of victories. And as a matter of fact, almost every battle that was fought between the English and Tsenacommacah won. He won the battles. Even though they had guns, even though they had ships, even though they had cannons, the way Tsenacommacah fought, those tools were basically useless. Because if you couldn't see them, you couldn't shoot them with your gun. And if they were so far upstream with their canoes and your ships couldn't reach them, you couldn't pursue them either. The forest was too dense for horses to travel. You basically had to get off of your horse and basically foot it, chase after. And oftentimes that would lead right into a setup ambush by Tsenacommacah. Oftentimes that's what they ran into, was an ambush, where arrows just would appear from nowhere, and that this was a mess for the English. Usually ended a lot of English dying. So the English figured, hey, that's not the way to fight these guys. That's a recipe for disaster right there. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is get them out in the open air and see them nice and clear, take a nice aim, and fire. That's what we want to do. And of course, that's why they thought that, this Tsenacommacah must be a Moor. Now, because they confuse it with a Moor, just for people that might not know, a Moor was an African person. Moor is an African. So he had darker skin like a West African individual. He looked like a West African, even though he lived in Europe. Basically, the Moors lived in Europe. That's what the Europeans called them. I don't know if that's what they call themselves, but that's what the Europeans called them. And so that's what a Moor was. Okay, so, and also the dress attire of the Tsenacommacahs was shirtless, the men and the women, topless. Nobody wore a shirt. Unless it was in the middle of the coldest part of the winter, then they would wear a buffalo skin wrap. But for the most part, during the summer and the spring and the fall, most of the natives did not wear any top or any kind of shirt or jacket at all. Often if you was at a certain age below puberty, you didn't wear any clothes at all. So the natives, the English were very startled by when they first met Matoaka and her little entourage of handmaidens, entourage of little girls her age that was basically assigned to wait on her hand and foot, just like any other princess. And they were startled that these people was walking around buck naked. As a matter of fact, even John Smith said, for a person who is, when they met Powhatan Confederacy, he says he seemed to be, he admired how stately and how elegant this man carried himself. And he almost forget that he was looking at a buck naked savage. Something to that level, what he said. So he basically used the word naked savage. Now, I don't know how naked he was, but again, if you see all the paintings and if you look at the descriptions, and even by the natives themselves, they're quite comfortable with not much clothes. And so that was noted by the English. And of course, the English, being people who clothe themselves a lot, they equated nakedness with being a barbarian, being a savage, being somebody that's not on their level. Because only some, and of course, all that had stemmed into their customs, based on in Christianity, I guess, But if you go to places like Brazil today, where there's a lot of natives that still go back and forth between the native tribes that's in the jungle area, I guess, in the forest area, and then they go and interface with modern Brazilians. In places like Venezuela, those people have a different attitude about clothes than we have in the United States too today. So that's a good way to kind of get an idea of cultural differences. And so the Tsenacommacah's culture was closer to that of Brazil today than that of today's American person in terms of their dress and their appearance. Now again, the kings would wear, and the queens would wear pearls and great wraps, robes with the kind of wrapped around their body. The robes had inlays of shells and pearls in various designs. I mean, this is one of the that was considered a royal type of robe or outfit. So they would wear robes. If you were somebody of stature, you might be wearing some type of royal robe that was very well designed by their best artisans, And of course, the robe would be made out of some type of buckskin, or some type of fabric that was more organically created, and not necessarily through the processing of cotton, not necessarily through the process of linen or anything like that, but by, oftentimes it was animal hides or some type of plant that could be easily appropriated to a garment. Through, weaving techniques. Oftentimes the people who actually made the wardrobes were the women. The people who were responsible for actually even doing the men's hair. There were no barbers. The barbers were women. So a lot of things in their society was kind of very set, The women basically did the farming. The men didn't do any farming. The women did the farming. The men basically did the hunting, and the men did the fishing, you know? And they were often away from the village. They would come home primarily in the evenings, where again they would have a lot of dance around the fire and storytelling and music. And this was a daily thing. This was every day. This is how they unwind from a hard day's work. And it would appear to somebody from England as very ceremonial, very, I guess it would appear even could even appear to be primitive. But then again, if you was to go to a club today in the United States and see the way people will carry on and dress, Christopher Jones, what's up? How you doing? You would think that that's very primitive. If you just came from Mars somewhere or some other place, that could appear to be very weird to you. So whenever you have one culture that comes into contact primarily with a strange new culture, you're going to have some misconceptions. And sometimes those misconceptions could be very prejudicial. And actually there could be a setback to the other culture that gets kind of stereotyped a little bit. And that's kind of what happened with the Tsenacommacah. They were considered to be barbarians and savages and primitive. And even though their conduct was very civil, because when the colonials were starving, now I don't know about, I guess this is the premise for Thanksgiving and stuff like that. Initially, even after some of their people were killed, one thing that they were able to do with Pocahontas and some of the kids was convince them to bring them some food. So every 3 or 4 days or so, the kids would bring them some deer. Now, not necessarily Pocahontas, but they would have, since Pocahontas had authority, she would basically command, because that's what was a warrant squaw. She was she was of the royal, so they basically, that another word for the translation for that is commander. You know, she would basically command somebody to do something, and her tribespeople was obligated to do whatever she said. And oftentimes that happened because how tough the father was, Powhatan Confederacy. And if you didn't do that, she could have a conversation with her dad, and that might not have gone down well for you. So I can see a culture where a lot of the men say, okay, now when my wife or my daughter came through here, she said this and that, and you didn't listen, so now you got to deal with me, kind of thing. Because all of the natives, even if they was part of the Powhatan Confederation or the Tsenacommacah Confederation or not, they still revered Powhatan Confederacy. So, and they revered him for his military power, for his ability to make them disappear as a group of people if he wanted to, just through his sheer might. The other tribes were essentially, I'm not going to say they were in fear of him, but they had a high amount of respect, even if they didn't want to be part of his confederation, even if they kind of were secretly maybe jealous of him in some way, they still had a major amount of respect for his authority. Now, again, that's for his authority. Now, when they found out, when some of the other tribes that weren't part of the Confederation found out that the English was somewhat powerful in their own right, and when the translator of Captain John Smith could convince some of these tribes, we're willing to take your side over that of Powhatan Confederacy and his confederation, and we're going to make you the paramount leader of this area. Even though I don't think they wanted to make that particular native the paramount leader, I think they just wanted to set one tribe against the next. Nonetheless, it did work. Well, you had certain tribal people who conspired with the colonizers to usurp Powhatan Confederacy, to basically go against Powhatan Confederacy and basically give up information, locations, be scouts for. And oftentimes this was an easy thing to do, because if you was to give a sword to a native person, all of a sudden they became very powerful because they already had some very advanced war skills, just with their stone clubs and some of their stone tools. But once they had actually an actual sword made out of steel, or a spear made out of steel, and the colonials were very keen to make sure they did not give the natives muskets, things like that. However, every once in a while, what the natives would do, if they had a chance, they would kill a colonial and steal his musket. So even though they were trading with them and trying to get allies with the enemies of Tsenacommacah, once the natives found out that, hey, we can get stuff from them. As a matter of fact, we don't have to just trade, because the native men especially was very used to getting things by force. They was very used to dominating somebody and taking over their stuff. You know, this wasn't just something the English was doing by themselves. I mean, the natives had this going pretty strong already amongst themselves. You know, Tsenacommacah, for example, went in and just wiped out a whole village, killed all the men, long before the English came. I mean, there was this, because the English asked, so what happened to this group of people here? Their numbers seem to be kind of low compared to the other people in the area, but they're part of Powhatan's Confederation. And it was explained to them by the natives that back in the day, Tsenacommacah basically came in, and the king had a disagreement with them over whether or not he was going to be part of the tribe or not. Tsenacommacah said, well, no, you're going to be part of the tribe. And essentially, the king said, no, I'm not. And he said, yes, I am. And then basically they fought a battle. That king lost. They killed all of the men. And he went and got his countrymen, his tribe, to wed all of the women after they killed all the men of that previous tribe, They kept the tribal name because the tribal name comes from the women. However, the allegiance of that tribe was now underneath Tsenacommacah. So basically the way Tsenacommacah did things was that you could be a part of me. You know, it was kind of like the mafia guy goes to you, said, you know, I'm going to make an offer you can't refuse. you know. And so if Tsenacommacah wanted your tribe, he basically was going to get the tribe. And if you went to refuse, well, that might not have been a good option for you. Then you might not have been very wise in the way you were handling that bit of diplomacy right there. However, by the time the English came, all that stuff had settled down. All of Tsenacommacah's rivals had been subdued, and everybody was basically underneath, Tsenacommacah's rule pretty comfortably. And the Tsenacommacah, for example, they did have some freedom, some autonomy. They were not underneath the Powhatan Confederation. They were not in the Tsenacommacah. They were related to. They spoke the same language. They had a very similar culture, but they really, the Tsenacommacah were not the Tsenacommacahs. They were, there was a Warrants had his own say, even during the time of the colonies. Now, what happened was, once the fighting started between the English and the natives, the Tsenacommacah figured out real quick that, hey, these people can't tell whether we're Powhatans, what they call them, Powhatans, or Tsenacommacah, or whether we're Tsenacommacah. They can't tell. So they'll kill us too. So they eventually gave power to Powhatan. So they just say, you know what? I think we need to put our differences aside, and we need to join forces. So what happened was the Tsenacommacah, slowly, their leaders started joining forces with Tsenacommacah and Abduction. And then they began to, and they became the 31st tribe, actually, because it was 30 before that. So they did eventually become Tsenacommacah, but they were basically their own tribe, independent of the Tsenacommacah, previous to them. And from that point on, those tribes had a very good relationship between each other. But it was some other tribes that basically still they did just like any other set of royals, actually. They would use diplomacy, and at the same time, they were stabbing each other in the back, So, they would, for example, they might marry the sister of Tsenacommacah, or the aunt or the niece of Tsenacommacah, somebody like that, knowing that they had a chance now to be actually the Mama Matoak, because they was married to the bloodline. But they were basically, as long as Chief Tsenacommacah didn't do anything, they was cool. But if they saw an opportunity, a little kink in the armor, a little weakness, they were ready to pounce, And that's what happened with the abduction of Matoaka. What happened was there was kinks in the armor of Tsenacommacah. The English had come, and the English said, look, Tsenacommacah is a nice guy, we like him a lot, but we like you better. As a matter of fact, to prove that we like you better, we're going to give you these swords, we're going to give you some pots and pans, we're going to give you some jewelry, we're going to give you some mirrors so you can see yourself, all these kind of wonderful things that you've never seen before. We're going to let you have that. But in exchange for that, we need to know the who, what, whens, and wheres. And then that's when they start learning about the story of Matoaka and how important she was. That's when they start learning that. And they put their translator in that tribe, embedded in that tribe. That tribe was near the Tsenacommacah, which is basically Gloucester County. Somewhat still in the same vicinity as the Mattaponi tribe today, and the Pamunkey tribe, but closer to the Mattaponi. And that particular king began to start teaching this particular translator all of the secrets of the native people, all of the weaknesses, especially of Tsenacommacah. And the main weakness was, the king explained to him, was that if you could get Matoaka, but you have to get her before she has a baby with Cocoon, because Cocoon is the person, they had this information, is the person that Tsenacommacah and his wife selected to be the future king, Matoaka and Cocoon. But what the natives impressed upon her is that Cocoon was not important, because all they had to do was go kill Cocoon. And guess what? They did kill Cocoon. But they said, that's not important. It's the two together. The woman is the most important element, though. Without Matoaka, killing Cocoon would be meaningless. It won't mean anything. As a matter of fact, only the person who marries Matoaka is important. And that could be me. I could be the one to marry her. I would love to be able to marry her. Now, he might have already had a wife, but he would love to be the one to marry her, because if you had say for example, if you was married to Matoaka's aunt, plus you was married to Matoaka, you had double opportunity to make sure somebody from your bloodline was in the divine bloodline of the kings for the future. Your descendants was going to be in that bloodline. You were going to be one of the great, you were going to add to the great bloodline of powerful kings and queens from the ancestors. So that was very important. That's how you rose to status in the Tsenacommacah tribe. So that's why Matoaka was very important. Captain John Rolfe found that out. He said, oh my gosh, so what chances do I have? Because, Matoaka be flirting with the little fellas out there in the yard all the time. And she's quite, and I don't know if anything was going on then, but this was before Captain Argyle. The plot that Captain Argyle was to keep a boat near this particular tribe, and where Matoaka was staying, because that was a tribe that was very near Cocoon's tribe. That was a tribe that that dealt with the tribe of Cocoon all the time. And so Matoaka was living with him because he was the Wezawarrants. He was the future Wezawarrants of that particular tribe. As a matter of fact, he had become the Wezawarrants of that tribe already. So in a sense, John Rolfe got to Matoaka too late. Because Matoaka had already started to, had already conceived a girl. which basically she would be the next Matoaka. She would be the next womb. That girl would be the next womb of the future kings. But I don't know if Matoaka ever even told John Roth about this or not. I think that was something, because they were considered sacred. And I don't think you would tell somebody who abducted you, because first of all, there's no record that John Roth knew about a child with cocoon. So Matoaka definitely kept that a secret. That was definitely kept a secret. So that tells you right there that Matoaka was not seeing eye to eye with John Roth, because according to her culture, that's something you definitely would share with your marital partner. You know, I had this, you know, we might want to watch out in the future, because I had a child with a native prince, and that child is going to become the next, he's going to replace my father. And she might have shared that with him. But guess what? She didn't share that. She didn't share that information with John Roth, because he never spoke on that. The only thing John Roth spoke on was his sons. So it was clear that John Roth was running the show in terms of all the information we know about Matoaka being a princess, and his son, he being the next king through the marriage of his son with Pocahontas, and Pocahontas being, they knew that Pocahontas was important, but they didn't know exactly how the matriarch system worked. Angela Jackson, how you doing? Anthony Brown, cousin, what's up, man? Hey, what's up, Tanya? Foreman Adjutant, how you doing? I'm in my studio painting my paintons. Painting my paintons. Let me see, let me go ahead and, I'm pretty sure y'all seen my paint. Most of y'all seen these paintings. I'm gonna just pan my little camera over. Over here I have this ancient Egyptian painting called Kamatu Kingdom. There's the king and the queen, and that's a Luxor temple and some pyramids in the background, and you know, close to what I could imagine a scene might have looked like back in the ancient Egyptian days. Of course, I have Barack Obama way back there, and I have Tupac Shakur and Nipsey Hussle. And then over here I have Ra on the throne contemplating the world underneath, and there's hourglass and there's a wine goblet. So there's a lot of symbolism in that. But right now I'm working on what's called the Powhatans, or the Powhatans, but really by the natives they will call it the Tsenacommacah. So this is Chief Powhatan, or Memo Matoak is basically what his title was. Basically means King of Kings, King of all the tribes. Wesawarank's, where he was the Wesawarank's of the Powhatans, which basically that's Churchill. And the capital of which is right around St. John's Church in Chimborazo. And Richmond was called Powhatan. And the James River was called Powhatan. And the Bond area of Richmond was actually Powhatan, the Vinelands, where they couldn't kill anything. So I'm sharing a lot of information about that. Kind of giving a little bit of educational on some of these topics. And if anybody have any information that they know of that they'd like to share, by all means, you can jump in on this live. Just click on the little button to say you like to, or send me a DM to say you'd like to join my live, and a little, and then I can send you an invite, and a little window would appear up in the corner, and you will be in on my painting session where I discuss the history of Virginia. Now, this is the history of Virginia before the English showed up. It's focusing on the history before, to the time they arrived. You know, it's not just the history before, it's the history before until the time that the English arrived. Because what people don't understand is that the history before the English arrived, Moors were in the New World, well, in North America, I should say, North America. And they were trading with the natives. They were also trading as far north as even Massachusetts, but most importantly, and probably a lot with the Tsenacommacah natives. And even to the point of intermarrying with some of the natives of the Tsenacommacahs as well. So a lot of people don't know that, and I just want to let you guys know that yes, that was going on. So because that's not put in your history book. You're not going to learn about that because that's not the narrative. The only way you're going to learn about that is you got to get with some archaeologists and get with some books and histories from other countries like Spain, and then you'll find out, oh my gosh, what are all these black people doing in Spain, and where they, and why and how they connected to West Africa, and how are they traveling from West Africa to the New World, and were they doing this before Columbus was doing it? And Pedro Alonso Nino actually led Christopher Columbus ships. He basically taught Christopher Columbus. He was the one operating the Septon, taught Christopher Columbus how to use one to navigate to the New World. And the people in Jamaica, called the Maroons, are the ships that Christopher Columbus sank after he thought he discovered actually India. But he didn't discover it in India. He discovered the people he called Indians. And he was mistaken in that as well. And he basically marooned. The whole word of marooning somebody kind of comes from Christopher Columbus sinking their ships and heading back to Spain and basically telling the Spanish, hey, I got this new route there. He definitely didn't want the Moors talking to nobody. You know, he had cornered the market on to how to get to India. That's worth a lot of money. In reality, he wasn't in India at all. He was dealing with Jamaica. And he didn't even not understand that. And then, of course, he got Americus, a map maker, to say, was I in fact in India? Of course, this guy didn't know what he was talking about either. He said, yeah, you actually in India. And so that's, therefore, they named this area after him, after his mistake, Americus. And so people made mistakes. Then the mistakes were figured out. And then what they did was cover them up. So what I'm doing is I'm uncovering some stuff. You know, I'm uncovering the cover-ups from when people made mistakes. Then they try to cover up the mistakes. And then, of course, what I'm going to do is uncover the mistakes, because it's important for the people who are of the Tsenacommacah heritage to know the truth about themselves. Because what's going to happen is that's going to become lost. It's become lost, and it's going to be a shame, because Mattapanai people of Mattapanai Pamunkey heritage, first of all, they will never know that they are. Then they would never know the actual stories. I mean, I had friends when I was in other cities, when I lived in other cities, like I said, there's Scottish and Irish and Italian and everything else. They can go back to their little hometowns in Italy or Ireland or somewhere and kind of know the family names and a little something about where they come from. But if you've been here for all your life, for multiple generations, and it's unfortunate because this country was originally all ours, you wouldn't know anything about your ancestry past, maybe grandma and grandpa, maybe great. In our case, we can go back to great-great-grandpa, but a lot of people can't do that. And the reason we can go to great-great-great-grandpa and grandma is because they were actually Tsenacommacah. They were actually Mattapanai. They were actually Native Americans. And they did, our particular Native Americans did blend with African people to some level, but they also blended with European people. So the story needs to be told correctly. And that's basically what my research is based on. And that's what kind of compelled me to start doing this series of paintings here. Because I saw a lot of pictures from the point of view of the colonizer, and paintings and etchings and engravings, and even paintings people make in modern times. And I said, oh my gosh, Disney went and made a whole movie that's a complete and bold-faced lie. And there's people from other countries who really do believe the Disney version. They really do believe that, and it's just not right And then a lot of times, even if they come to, say, a place like Jamestown, because they have this amusement park area here in Virginia called Colonial Jamestown, Colonial Williamsburg, and you have people who are natives from this area who kind of show up and tell their story. And of course, you know, the people from other countries say, "Where's your teepee?" Well, the natives didn't live in this area, didn't live in the teepee, you know. "Where's your horse?" They didn't have horses, you know. So those are the Plains natives. So there's a lot of lack of knowledge, I could say, or ignorance. And in order to address that, somebody has to be willing to tell the true story, to actually get the story right, first of all. Then they have to have enough knowledge base to tell the story. And through painting is a storytelling medium. It's kind of like a movie. In many ways, filmmaking came out of painting. And because in the old days, that's what they had to do to get the story across. If you look at artists like Eugene Delacroix and Géricault, they did some great, "Hey, how's it going? How's it going?" They did some great, Gloria Booker. Go back over 20 years. I'm going back about 200 years. I'm going back 200 plus years. I'm going back to 1607. Actually, I went all the way back to 1500 with Don Luis and Opec Tsenacommacah. But if you guys have any questions about anything that I've said, or if you look at my older videos, what I was talking about yesterday. Now, I did have a period where my I guess my sound went out on me a little bit. I mean, how's my sound now? Is it loud enough? Or because I'm kind of using this. I might have made it a little too loud now. So I did have a period where my sound kind of went out a little bit. I don't want it to distort too much. Sometimes I play with it too much. I'm gonna just leave it right there. So my little battery on my lavalier went out. So I'm experimenting with some new sound, because earlier when my studio was, I didn't have to run the air conditioning system. You know, the studio was nice and cool. But now that I got my air conditioning on, it's some noise. So I can run my air conditioner to cool my studio down some, so I'm not running hot, you know. And use the lavalier, and the lavalier doesn't pick up the air conditioning so bad. So I'm just testing this out right now so that I can continue to do these little history lessons as I paint in my studio. Of course, these paintings, once COVID-19 stops plaguing the world, these paintings are going to appear in galleries around the planet and the country. And and of course, that will help get the true story out. It'd be a great, it's a great platform to get the story out, the right stories out. So, I'll probably be the next 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more, kind of tightening this painting up a little bit. At this point, you can see I have quite a few big ones. You know, this one right here, the Tupac and Nipsey one, is 40 by 60 inches. I have about 4 of those already in the studio. I have others elsewhere. This one right here is 60 by 90 inches, and this one here is 96 by 106 inches. This is 69 by 106 inches.